Hello students and welcome to chapter number 2. In this chapter we will discuss a major and an essential task that managers do and are involved in on a daily basis, and that is making decisions. So we will discuss the decision making process, and we will also discuss a number of different issues and biases and errors that managers must avoid when involved in decision making.
Decision making is a very important skill that managers need to master. And decision making is not only for managers, it's for anyone in the professional world. So even you as fresh graduates, even though you will not be hired as managers from the beginning, but you probably know and you have probably read somewhere that a lot of employers, actually most employers, require that their freshly hired employees possess uh, sophisticated decision-making skills. So this is something that you need to develop even from the beginning, from right now. This is probably your first year in college, but still you need to work on mastering this skill, how to become a better decision maker, because making decisions is a daily part of life. You have to make small and big decisions throughout your personal and professional life. So this is something that employers require even if you are not in a managerial position. So this is one good reason why you need to study about decision making, the different strategies that you can employ, and what can you do to develop this kind of skill.
Okay, so let us begin with coming up with an identification of the word decision. So a decision is basically making a choice from two or more alternatives. So you have a number of different options, a number of different choices. So do you go with option A or do you go with option B? So if you want to go out for lunch, do you go for A, McDonald's, or do you go for B, Burger King, for example? So the same thing applies in the work environment. Do we invest in this project or not, A or B? Do we open a new branch in Jubail or not? So these are the decisions that managers are involved in on a daily basis. So a decision is basically making a choice from different alternatives or options. So here is the decision-making process summarized in a nice looking figure or graph. So it consists of a number of steps which we will discuss in detail, but I would always advise you to come back to this figure in order to summarize the entire thing and also get some examples of what each and every step means. So we begin, of course, with step number 1, and that is identifying a problem. First of all, let's talk a little bit about what we mean by a problem and why do we always have to approach things like problems. So a problem is an obstacle, is a difficulty, is something that makes it difficult to achieve a desired goal or purpose. So you want to go out for lunch, okay? So now the problem here is that do we go for option A or option B? Do we go for McDonald's or do we go for Burger King? So the problem is, making that decision. The problem is I want to satisfy my hunger. I am hungry right now. I want to go out for lunch. So how do I satisfy my hunger? So that is the problem. So of course, in the work environment, it is on a much larger scale than that. So how do we keep our customers satisfied? That's a problem. How do we increase the profits of our company? That is a problem. Okay? So every decision starts with a problem. It's a discrepancy, an incompatibleness between something that is current, an existing condition, and something that is wanted, a desired thing. So what is the discrepancy when you are hungry? So now I am hungry. I want to become not hungry. Now we are making a profit of 1 million Saudi riyals. We want to make a profit of 2 million Saudi riyals. So that is the discrepancy. That is the incompatibleness between what we want and what is currently the situation. So we always approach things like this. We always approach every decision by identifying the problem, because once you identify the problem and once you handle and treat things always like problems, then you can follow a systematic and a structured way of tackling this. That now you can actually follow this 8-step process that we just saw in the figure, so that you can come up with a nice solution. So one example over here is that Amanda, who is a sales manager, she needs new laptops. She needs new laptops. So that is a problem for her, because what is the current situation? We have no laptops, or our laptops are very old. What is the desired goal? We want new and modern and up-to-date laptops. So that was step number 1. Always start with identifying the problem. Moving on to step number 2, which is identifying the decision criteria. So what are those criteria? These are factors that are important to resolving the problem. So you want to go for lunch. So what are your criteria to satisfy your hunger? So do I want something vegetarian, or do I want to go out for a steak? Do I want something a little bit light? Maybe I'm on a diet. Or do I want something sweet? So those are the criteria that you will follow and apply in order to make your decision. In our example, in the laptop example, so now you come up with the criteria for buying those laptops. هل تحتاج الذاكرة تكون عالية؟ هل تحتاج الريزولوشن والوضوح حق الشاشات يكون عالي, and so on. Okay, so the display quality, the memory, the battery life, and so on. And of course, prices and things, the cost and the budget are always a major factor when it comes to making any decision. So you first identify the problem, what is the difficulty right here, and then how am I going to make that decision? Based on what? Okay, so what exactly do you need? And now step number 3, which is allocating weights to the criteria. So you basically give each and every criteria a number, or you kind of order them in terms of priority. So which is more important to you? Is it price? Is it quality? Is it, when we talk about our computers, هل يهمني تكون وضوح الشاشة أكثر ولا يهمني يكون سرعة الجهاز أكثر? Okay, is it the resolution that matters to me the most, or is it like the battery life, for example, that matters to me even more? When you go out for lunch, is it the price? Is it the location of the restaurant? Is it the options that are available in the menu? And so on. Okay, maybe you have an allergy to something, so you want to make sure that the restaurant is not serving something that you're allergic to. Okay, so now you allocate weights. You assign a number or a weight to each and every criteria. So if, for example, battery life matters to you the most, so now battery life gets 10. And then right after battery life comes, for example, memory. So now memory gets an 8, and so on. Okay? So here's an example of how those criteria are given some weights. So in this example, Amanda, our sales manager, ordered these criteria in terms of priority and importance. So for her, memory and storage comes first, and they are the most important factors. So she assigned them a 10. And then second is battery life, and so on. So you order the criteria in terms of importance, and then you assign each and every them, and you allocate weights to each and every one of them. Then we move on to step number 4, which is developing alternatives. So alternatives means options, means choices. Okay, So now we come up with a list of choices. So in our restaurant example, now that we have the criteria, so now we have decided, for example, that we want to go out for fast food. We want to go out for fast food. So now what are the options? We have McDonald's, we have Burger King, we have Kudu, we have Hardee's, we have KFC. So those are our alternatives. And in our Amanda example, so she wants to buy new laptop. So what are the different alternatives or choices? So she can go for Mac, she can go for ASUS, she can go for whatever, Toshiba, Sony, and so on. So these are the different possibilities, the different choices that she will choose from. And here are the two things mixed together. So now we have the alternatives: HP ProBook, Sony, Lenovo, Apple, and then we also have those criteria and their weights. Okay, so this is how you come closer now to resolving the problem and making a decision. Now it's step number 5, which is now analyzing those alternatives. So now you evaluate each and every alternative. You appraise. Appraising means evaluating. الآن نبدأ نقيم الخيارات اللي احنا عندنا. أقيم السوني هذا، أقيم ال HP، أقيم الأسوس، أقيم الأبل. Okay, in terms of strengths and weaknesses. Why is actually Apple better than HP, or is HP better than Toshiba, and so on? How do I evaluate those? Based on the criteria, based on how well is this alternative, is this option when it comes to resolving my problem, when it comes to solving my issue and overcoming the difficulty that I'm facing. Okay, so this is how you evaluate or appraise your different alternatives. How good is it? You evaluate it in terms of strengths and weaknesses. How good is it when it comes to solving my difficulty, when it comes to overcoming my problem? And then number 6 is selecting an alternative. الآن قيمت كل الخيارات اللي عندي, and now I should now select one. and قررت اني انا راح اكل في هارديز, او قررت اني انا راح اشتري ال HP للتيم اللي عندي في القسم. Okay, so now you select. How do you select? احنا مو حطينا لهم ارقام قبل شويه. We just allocated weights. We assigned them numbers, each and every alternative based on the criteria that we developed. So الoption اللي ياخذ اعلى رقم, of course this is the one that I will choose. Okay, so the alternative with the highest total weight is of course the one that is going to be chosen, لأنه الويتس هذه احنا حطيناها بناء على الأهمية, بناء على إلى أي درجة هذا المعيار, this criteria is important to me. So of course the one that is given the most weight is the one that is going to be most effective when it comes to solving my problem. يعني الآن هنا الخيارات اللي عندنا زائد معايير الاختيار زي الميموري والبطارية والضمان وغيره. جمعنا هذه الموازين اللي احنا حطيناها, هذه الأرقام اللي احنا حطيناها. الخيار اللي عنده أو اللي حصل على أعلى تقييم, أعلى مجموع, هذا الخيار اللي أنا راح أختاره. Okay, so in this case the one that got the most points was the Dell. Okay, so the Dell got 249, so this is probably the one that Amanda is going to choose. And then number 7 is implementing the alternative. So now putting things into action, now like executing my choice, actually delivering on what I've just decided. Okay, so now we tell everyone about our decision, and now we go out and dine or have lunch at Hardee's. Or now Amanda goes and buys those Dell laptops. And then finally, step number 8, which is the evaluation of the decision effectiveness. Just because we are done with the decision-making process, it doesn't mean that we stop. مو عشان أنا خلاص طلعنا وخلصنا التجربة حقتنا في المطعم أو اشترينا اللابتوبات اللي نبغاها, it means that the process now is over. No. We always have to go back and evaluate. We always have to go back and evaluate the effectiveness of our decision. Did we actually do well? Did we select the right choice? How can we improve our decision-making process in the future? What mistakes have we made? How can we avoid them? Okay, and so on. So that's the evaluation of our decision. So الآن بدأنا نستعمل هذه اللابتوبات. هل فعلا كان خيارنا صحيح؟ هل فعلا كان القرار اللي قررناه ممتاز لما اخترنا هذه اللابتوبات الدل ولا لا؟ Okay, so this is the evaluation step. And in this slide and in the coming slide, we kind of mix and match the decisions that managers make with the 4 functions. So we said in chapter number 1 that managers are involved in 4 major functions: planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. So in each and every function, there are big decisions that managers must make. So here in the slide and in the next slide, these are just examples of the different decisions that managers must make in each and every little function. So in controlling, for example, they have to make a decision of how these activities can be controlled, or when is a performance deviation considered significant. Okay, so these are decisions that are that managers are involved in on a daily basis whenever they are involved in their 4 major functions. Okay, now that we have talked about the decision-making process, we will discuss now the different approaches that managers sometimes follow in order to make those decisions. So how one manager, for example, is different from another when it comes to their style in decision-making. So one approach of decision-making is rationality. So this is when people are rational, when people are logical. So their interest is maximizing value for the organization, maximizing value of the situation, while trying to be as logical and as consistent as possible. So in order to follow that style, in order to be rational, there are some assumptions. There are some assumptions of rationality. So what does that mean? So once we get to explaining them, it will be a little bit clearer. So for example, it says that the decision maker would be fully objective and logical. So we are assuming that the decision maker here is someone who is completely objective and logical. Imagine that you are a recruitment manager and you have now 2 candidates applying for a job. One of them is your brother. The second one is someone that you don't know. Can you say 100% that you are not going to be biased towards your brother? It is very, very rare that some kind of non-objectivity would always be there. So you have to be sure that you are being 100% objective. ما عندك أي انحياز على الإطلاق لأخوك اللي مقدم على نفس الوظيفة اللي أنت مسؤول عن تقييمها. Okay, so this is the one assumption of rationality. إنه أنت راح تكون موضوعي, objective 100%. Now the second assumption here is that the problem faced would be clear and unambiguous. The problem is straightforward. The problem is like very clear and can be approached in a very logical, in a very straightforward way. And this is also very rare in business situations because business problems are always so complicated and complex that it requires a lot of time just to analyze them. And finally, the decision maker would have a clear and specific goal and know all the possible alternatives and consequences and consistently select the alternative that maximizes achieving that goal. In business situations, in the work environment, this is extremely rare because, as we have mentioned, the business environment is so dynamic, is constantly evolving, so that the pace of change is very quick, is very fast. So things develop and the problem gets even more complicated. So you sometimes following this rational approach is not really feasible because of the nature of the situation, the nature of the problem. What we are saying right now is that we're not saying that rationality is the best way to follow, or you should always avoid rationality. What we are saying is that this is one way of evaluating things, one way of decision making, and you have to be very careful about what you choose. You have to evaluate the situation itself. Is this situation suitable for me to apply rationality or not? How do you evaluate the situation? Go ahead and use these three assumptions. Can I be fully objective? Is the problem straightforward? And can I have a clear and specific goal and be able to evaluate all the alternatives in order to maximize that goal? Okay, so this was the rationality style of decision-making approach. So we continue with these different styles and the different factors and circumstances that sometimes go into decision making. So we just discussed rationality. Now we will discuss something that is called bounded rationality. So bounded, it means that you are limited. So when you are bounded by something, it means it limits you. So what is bounded rationality? It's decision making that is rational. So it follows the same concepts and the same approach as the one that we just discussed. However, it is limited or bounded by an individual's ability to process information. So each and every individual, each and every manager has some kind of an ability to process the different information in order to make a decision. So sometimes, because of your ability, because of your limitations as a human being, as a manager, as someone who is a professional in the working environment, you are bounded and limited by your own ability as an individual to process and analyze and understand this information. So بناء على فهمك وبناء على قدراتك في تحليل وفهم الموضوع, you make that decision. Another concept here is called Satisfice, which is accepting solutions that are just good enough. Good enough. So you have a problem, you want to increase the company's profits by 2 million Saudi riyals. You were able to increase them by only 1.5 million, 1.5 million. That's good enough, so I'm just going to stick with it. Okay, so that is one issue in decision making, accepting solutions that do not provide you with your desired goal, but just gets you closer. This is one way of approaching decisions. Sometimes this is something that can actually work in certain organizations, but in others this is totally unacceptable. You either get what we asked you or you're done. Another concept that is very important to understand here is what is called escalation of commitment. When you escalate something, you get it higher, you increase it. So escalation of commitment, you increase your commitment. You increase your commitment towards what? To a previous decision, even though, despite evidence it may have been wrong. لما الواحد من هذول المدراء بالفصيح كذا ينشف راسه ومصمم انه to stick with the decision that they have chosen before. Okay, so they increase their commitment towards a previous solution, even though this solution has been proven wrong. لكن خلاص, they have this commitment towards the solution and they are going to stick with it no matter what. Of course, this is an issue. This is a problem. Okay? Now, moving on to another style of decision making, and that is intuition. So what is the role of intuition when it comes to decision making? So we have been saying that decision making should be approached systematically. There's a process that you should follow, and there are different circumstances and factors that you must take into consideration. But there's always this factor called intuition that plays a major role in decision making. When we say intuition, we talk about your feelings, we talk about your emotions, we talk about your own experiences when it comes to certain situations. So intuitive decision making is making decisions on the basis of things like experience, feelings, and accumulated judgment. So your opinions about something. So you're not following any system, you're not following any particular step-by-step process, but this is how you feel in your gut. This is a hunch feeling. Search these words, gut feeling, hunch feeling. Okay, so this is something that you just feel inside of you. As a manager, I don't think that this is the right way to go. I don't think, based on my previous experience and based on my own personal feelings and opinions, that we should open a new branch in this area, for example. So intuition is actually something that is very important, and it has been proven to be an effective way for some people when it comes to decision making. Of course, things always work better in combination. ما في أحد يقول لك لا تعتمد على على الانتويشن وعلى الحدس. So intuition هذا اللي هو الحدس, this hunch feeling. أو يقول لك اعتمد فقط على السيستم وعلى step by step way of doing things. You always have to combine more than one approach together in order to reach a decision. So what is intuition? This is basically a nice looking graph that summarizes what intuition is all about. So it's about experience, it's about judgments, it's about how you feel about things. And now another way of making decisions that is called evidence-based management. So that is the modern way, that is the systematic way in which we use the best available evidence in order to make our decisions and improve our practice as managers. So this is basically when you go out and look for research papers. This is when you go out and see what the leaders of the industry did in order, and can I copy them or not. اروح اشوف اعظم الشركات في المجال ايش سوت. ارامكو، سابك، الشركات الكبيرة جدا اللي في نفس مجال الصناعة حقي. أنا شركة طيران، خليني أروح أشوف شركة بوينغ حقت الطيران إيش سوت. They must have faced a similar situation, so let me look and see what have they done. And is it something that that I can apply and bring into my own organization? So basically, you make decisions only based on evidence, only based on proof. من فين أجيب الإيفيدنس هذا؟ أجيبه من المجلات العلمية، أجيبه من الشركات الكبيرة، أجيبه من الكبار العلماء والخبراء في المجال and so on. Okay? So we have been saying you should approach everything as a problem in order to to make a decision, but we haven't discussed really the nature of those problems. You have to understand that there are some problems that are very straightforward, very clear, that can be easily defined and and as a result easily tackled and handled. So these are called structured problems. Structured. It is much easier to analyze and understand. So when the problem itself is structured, then you can follow a programmed decision-making process. هنا سهل جدا لما تكون البروبلم منظمة، تكون البروبلم itself is structured. من الأسهل جدا إنه أنت تحل المشكلة هذه and make a decision regarding this problem and by following a programmed decision-making process. الخطوات والسيستم هذا اللي احنا تكلمنا عنه في بداية المحاضرة. So when the problem is structured, now you can follow programmed decision-making process, which is a repetitive decision that can be handled by a routine approach. اوكي. صارت مشكله هذه تواجهها الشركه مثلا بشكل يومي، بشكل شبه يعني ربع سنوي او غيره. So this is structured. So every year we face this problem and it has become so clear to us that we can just easily solve it by following a step-by-step process. There are always these three very important words that you will always encounter in the work environment. And one big question that sometimes you will be asked in a job interview is, what is the difference between a policy and a procedure? Okay, so what is a procedure? It's a series of sequential steps used to respond to a well-structured problem. الإجراء, so procedure, it's a step-by-step process of how to deal with anything. ايش هو البروسيجر في الشركة عشان توظف شخص؟ ايش هو البروسيجر في الشركة لما يكون في كاستمر زعلان؟ Okay, and so on. So in there, the company itself develops their own, its own procedure about how to handle certain problems and how to deal with certain situations. So it's a step-by-step process, detailed. Okay, but a policy is more general. It's more like a guideline for how decisions should be made. يعني هتحصل البوليسي تقول لك ما راح تكون مفصلة، ما راح تكون ستيب باي ستيب، راح تقول لك كذا قواعد عامة فقط. اوكي، لما تتعامل مع كاستمر غضبان يعني لابد انه انت تكون لبق، لابد انه انت تكون صبور، لابد انه انت تكون كذا، لكن ما قال لك قول كذا، افعل كذا، وجهه الى المدير، ارفع خطاب لكذا. هذا راح يقول لك اياها مين؟ البروسيجر. So the procedure is going to tell you, try to calm down the customer, offer him a drink, then talk to your supervisor, let the supervisor write a letter, and so on. So this is the procedure. It's more detailed, more about steps, about when it comes to handling situations. Like in a policy is more like general guidelines. And then you have rules and regulations. So these are about these are explicit statements that tells managers when can or can, what can or cannot be done. هذه الأنظمة، اللوائح، القوانين. Okay, so this basically tells you you cannot fire someone for doing this, or you must fire someone when they do that. Okay, ممنوع انه انت تسوي الشيء الفلاني، او لابد انك تسوي الشيء الفلاني. These are rules, regulations, and so on. طيب, we just talked about structured problems. Of course, there are problems that are exactly the opposite, which are unstructured problems. لما تكون البروبلم نفسها is very complex, very unusual, something that is new that you have never seen before, something that you have never experienced in your organization or in your department. So this is a problem that is unstructured. Okay, sometimes even the information about the problem is like unavailable or incomplete or very ambiguous, meaning unclear. So when the problem itself is unstructured, then the decision-making process that you will follow is going to be non-programmed. ما راح تقدر تمشي على الستيب باي ستيب process اللي احنا تكلمنا عنها، تمشي على الخطوة الأولى خلص منها الخطوة الثانية and life is good. When the problem itself is unstructured, is very complicated. أحيانا تضطر تبدأ في خطوة 3 على طول، بعدين ترجع إلى خطوة 2، بعدين تنقز على طول إلى خطوة 7. So this is the problem, this is the issue, this is the difficulty when it comes to handling or dealing with unstructured problems. Okay, is that the decision-making process now is going to be unique and something that is even new. And the problem and the situation itself is also new. Okay, so this is basically a comparison between structured problems and unstructured problems, and programmed and non-programmed decisions. So the difference when it comes to different elements of evaluation. So أي واحدة فيهم أصعب، أي واحدة فيهم تتطلب معلومات أكثر، أي واحدة فيهم إيش الفرق بين ال programmed decisions and non-programmed decisions when it comes to the time that you need to solve the problem, and so on. So this is something that might make understanding the difference between the two types of problems and the two types of decision-making processes a little bit more clear. Okay, and now we have to discuss the conditions of decision making. يعني الآن قلنا managers and people are different when it comes to making decisions. We have different styles, different ways, different approaches that they follow. So based on what are people different? So these are the elements over here, the conditions of decision making. You have certainty and uncertainty and of course risk. So we have to look at the situation itself. When you are in a situation where the manager can make accurate decisions because all outcomes are known. So this is a very clear and certain situation. So this basically means that the problem is very clear. لما أنا أختار الخيار الأول 100% الأوتكم والنتيجة راح تكون كذا. This is no big deal. Okay? This is very certain situation. مؤكد نسبة كبيرة جدا إنه إذا اخترت الخيار الأول راح تكون النتيجة الفلانية. The opposite is uncertainty. When you do not know what is going to happen, or you do not have, a strong estimation of what the outcome is going to be, what the outcome is going to generate. So a situation in which a decision maker has neither certainty nor reasonable probability to estimate that estimates the available. So ما أعرف لو فتحنا فرع جديد هل راح نزيد مبيعات الشركة ولا لا. You never know. لو طردت الموظف هذا اللي عندي هل راح يزيد الساتسفاكشن حق الكاستمرز ولا لا. Okay, so sometimes some situations are so uncertain that it makes it even more difficult to make a decision. فهنا يجي risk taking. Some people are risk takers and some like to play it safe. So a risky situation is a situation in which the decision maker is able to estimate the likelihood of certain outcomes. إلى أي مدى ممكن يصير كذا. Okay? الآن لو طردت الموظف هذا إلى أي مدى, to which extent am I going to improve customer satisfaction? Am I going to solve this problem? Okay? To which extent is this situation going to happen? So this is how sometimes, some managers are different from others. بعضهم ما عنده مشكلة, ممكن ياخذ مخاطرة. راح نخاطر. قالوا له والله لو فتحت فرع جديد ما ندري 50-50 يمكن ويمكن لا, يمكن نربح ونحسن أرباح الشركة ويمكن نخسر كثير. فبعضهم يتحمس ويقدم على خيار ممكن يكون فيه مخاطرة كبيرة, وبعضهم لا, ما يحب يخاطر. Okay, so these are the conditions of making decisions. And this is how, situations are different, and this is what makes managers different in terms of, being more effective or different just in style when it comes to decision making. Since we just talked about risk, we have to talk about how to manage that risk. ما نبغى نعطي المانجرز الحرية المطلقة إنه هو يخاطر بأموال الشركة, for example. Okay, so we have to be very careful when it comes to how to manage this risk. والآن في تخصصات منفردة في الجامعات اسمها risk management. تأخذ ماجستير أو تأخذ بكالوريوس في تخصص اسمه risk management. So how to manage this risk? So managers can use historical data from the past experiences or secondary information that lets them assign probabilities to different alternatives. So what basically happens over here is that we look into the data. We analyze the data that we have. طبعا الداتا اللي عندنا about previous experiences, about previous incidents, about these are historical data about situations that have already happened and taken place. So we look into the data and we try to analyze this data and try our best to come up with an estimation. And then managers must use the information to help make decisions by calculating the expected value. Okay, the expected value or the expected return. So now we go back to mathematics, we go back to statistics. ايش احتمالية انه يصير الوضع هذا؟ ايش احتمالية انه فتح فرع جديد راح يحسن مبيعات الشركة؟ What is the probability This is something that you will study in detail later on in your courses, Statistics 1 and 2. So what is the probability of this situation? So this exercise will give managers an idea of the average expected outcome. Okay? If we put it now in an example, it will be more clear. So look at this example. So this is a company and they have different situations. What will happen if we have heavy snowfall, normal snowfall, or light snowfall? كم الريفينيو الاكسبكتد اللي راح يجي من هذه شركة متخصصة انها تشيل الثلوج المتساقطة على الشوارع. اوكي طيب اذا كان تساقط الثلوج heavy كثيف وغزير جدا، او اذا كان عادي، او اذا كان خفيف، كم المبيعات او المدخول اللي راح ندخله احنا كشركة تزيل هذه الثلوج؟ قالوا if it's heavy snowfall راح ندخل 850,000، إذا كان عادي جدا ومتوسط راح يكون 725,000، وإذا كان خفيف جدا and very light it's going to be 350,000. And now we move into the third column, which is now the probability. احتمالية. اوكي ايش نروح للأرصاد الجوية مثلا نشوف كم احتمالية انه يكون تساقط الثلوج غزير. وجدنا انها 30%. اوكي normal 50%. light 20%. And now we multiply the expected revenue by this probability. So نضرب الآن كم المدخول المتوقع expected revenue ضرب الاحتمالية ضرب probability. And now we will get now the expected outcome of each and every alternative. Okay, and this is how you manage your risk, by basically assigning weights, probabilities, and coming up with a way in order to estimate the outcome of each and every situation. Okay, it has come to this point now in our lecture where we will discuss the different problems, the different errors and biases, the different problems that happen with decision making. So these are problems, these are errors, these are mistakes that are associated with decision making which you should avoid. These are problems that you should avoid whenever you are involved in decision making. So the first problem, the first error, the first mistake is called heuristics. The H here is silent. So what is heuristics? It's using rules of thumb to simplify decision making. What are rules of thumb? Rules of thumb are not really rules. These are just, things that people have agreed on. They do not have any concrete evidence. They do not have any, reference for them. ما هي مبنية على أي حاجة علمية. ما هي مبنية على أي قاعدة أو نظرية صحيحة. Okay? These are things that people have just agreed on. So rules of thumb. It's good to Google them. It doesn't hurt. Go and try to find what rules of thumb mean. يعني أحيانا بعض مدرسين اللغة الإنجليزية يقول لك it's a good rule of thumb إنه تكون الأساي لا تقل عن 3 صفحات. من فين جابوا هالكلام؟ هل في نظرية تقول هذا الكلام؟ هل في شيء علمي يثبت هذا الكلام؟ No. كذا شيء تعارفوا عليه واتفقوا عليه بطريقة غير رسمية. So the problem with these is that these are not based on any, concrete evidence. They don't have a really good and strong reference for them. So when you rely on them too much, you could fall into the trap of making the wrong decision. Okay? Now the second one is overconfidence bias. Overconfidence. When you are confident about yourself, it means that you trust yourself. The problem happens when you are too confident or overconfident. So holding unrealistically positive views of oneself and one's performance. هنا المشكلة لما الواحد يثق في نفسه بطريقة مبالغ فيها جدا ويصير ما عاد حتى يسمع من الآخرين. مين أنت عشان تقول لي أنا عندي 10 سنين خبرة، أنا خريج جامعة كذا، مو أنت اللي تعلمني. overconfidence. This is a problem in decision making. Okay? Then immediate gratification bias. So immediate means now, very fast. It happens at the moment. Gratification means basically satisfaction, or this, fulfillment that you get. So what is the problem here? So immediate gratification bias is choosing alternatives or options that give you immediate rewards and avoid immediate costs. يكون عندك option A و option B. هذا هو decision making. You have option A, option B and option C. بعض الناس أو بعض المانجرز يقرر إنه يروح مع الأوبشن اللي يعطيه ويحقق له المصلحة بشكل سريع جدا. For example, option A can, in the short term, it will result in excellent outcomes, لكن maybe in the long term, على المدى البعيد, راح يسبب مشاكل. So they go for the option that gives them rewards immediately and gives them that satisfaction immediately. Option B ممكن ما راح تبين نتائجه الآن، أو على الأقل ممكن في الوقت الحالي بالعكس راح يبان إنه خيار خاطئ، لكن بعد 6 شهور راح تبدأ نتائجه تظهر وراح تكون نتائجه ممتازة جدا. لكن what managers do sometimes is that they make this mistake by choosing the option that gives them immediate rewards. على طول أبغى الخيار اللي يخلي الناس كلها تحبني في البداية وأخذ عليها شهادة شكر وتقدير والناس كلها تصفق لي. ما أبغى الخيار اللي ما راح تبين نتائجه إلا بعدين. So this is of course a mistake. This is a problem. This is an error in decision making. Okay, it's called immediate gratification bias. Is when you go for the option that gives you immediate rewards and you avoid anything that might seem to your bosses and to your teammates that it's a cost, it's something that didn't result in what they wanted. Another mistake, another problem, another error, another bias is called the anchoring effect. This is basically when you fixate on initial information and ignore subsequent information. Let's put it in a nice story. So you received a report as a manager that there is a problem when it comes to customer satisfaction. عملاء البنك ما هم راضين عن موظفين البنك. هذا التقرير انت استلمته في جانيوري. طيب بدأت تحاول تشتغل على المشكلة هذه ما هي شغلة تنحل في يوم وليلة، يبغى لها أسابيع من التخطيط ومن اتخاذ القرار ومن تدريب الموظفين ومن كذا. بعد 3 شهور جاك تقرير آخر إنه والله الحمد لله الكاستمر satisfaction اختلف وارتفع and now we have a different problem. But you are still stuck in the first report. You are still fixating on this initial information and you are ignoring and discounting whatever that is whatever updates that have taken place. ما زلت انت معلق في التقرير الاول اللي يقول انه كان العملاء غير راضين، مع انه في تقارير جديدة تقول العكس، لكن انت still معلق هناك. This is called the anchoring effect. And then you have the selective perception bias. This is basically when you pick and choose whatever that suits you, selecting, organizing, and even interpreting events based on the decision maker's biased perceptions. اللي يناسبك واللي يجوز لك تاخذه من السالفة وتاخذه من التقرير وتاخذه من السيتويشن، واللي ما يجوز لك ترميه. This is of course a big problem. جاك موظف يشتكي من رئيسه في العمل يقول لك سبني وأخطأ علي ورفع صوته علي ويعني ارتكب مخالفات عمل كبيرة جدا، حتى في يوم من الأيام أنا جيت متأخر 5 دقائق ورمى الأوراق في وجهي ومش عارف مين. الآن أنت سبت السالفة هذه كاملة، سبت السالفة كل الأخطاء والمصايب اللي ارتكبها رئيسه في العمل سبتها وقلت له أنت كيف تجي يوم الاثنين متأخر 5 دقائق. This is selective perception. Okay, when you pick and choose the things that matter to you the most, the things that just basically suit you, and then you neglect others. Then confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is basically seeking out information that confirms, that reaffirms your past choices while discounting any contradictory information. لما تبحث فقط في المصادر اللي تدعم قرارك. الآن طلب منك المانجر تبحث عن المشكلة التالية: هل زيادة رواتب الموظفين راح تؤدي إلى زيادة إنتاجيتهم ولا لا؟ هو طلب منك انك تبحث هل. انت راح لازم تبحث في الخيارين. تبحث في المصادر اللي تقول لك نعم زيادة رواتب الموظفين تؤدي إلى زيادة الإنتاجية، أو لا زيادة رواتب الموظفين ليس لها علاقة بالإنتاجية، لكن أنت جايز لك سالفة زيادة الرواتب، فتروح تجيب له فقط المصادر والتجارب اللي تثبت رأيك، وسبت كل المصادر الموثوقة الثانية اللي ممكن تكون أقوى من المصادر اللي أنت جبتها اللي تعاكس رأيك. So this is confirmation bias, when you only look for information and sources that just confirms your opinion, and you totally neglect any other source that opposes your opinion and choice. Framing bias is, framing is about understanding the situation, like what aspects would you highlight, what things of the situation would you choose to focus on, and what other factors or elements of the situation you would ignore. So framing bias is selecting and highlighting aspects of a situation while ignoring other aspects. ركزت في الريبورت فقط على انه والله يا أخي الطلاب في الكلية الجامعية زعلانين إنه ما في مدرسين كفاية. طيب التقرير ذكر كذلك إنه المدرسين أيضا عندهم مشكلة في المكاتب، المدرسين يشتكون إنه الضغط عليهم عالي، المدرسين يشتكون إنهم ما عندهم كتب وما عندهم مصادر كافية إنهم هم يؤدوا عملهم بشكل كويس. لا، أنت فقط ركزت على المدرسين يشتكون فقط من الطلاب وكذا. So framing bias. Okay. Then availability bias. Losing decision-making objectivity by focusing on the most recent events. A very clear example of this is the annual performance appraisal of employees, the annual performance evaluation, التقييم السنوي حق الموظفين. كل موظف في أي شركة كانت في أي مجال عمل لازم يصير له شيء اسمه التقييم السنوي. نهاية كل سنة يجي مديره المباشر ويقيمه. طيب هو اسمه تقييم سنوي، يعني it should begin from the beginning of the year from January until December. لكن مدراء ما يسووه إلا نهاية السنة فقط، يجي آخر ديسمبر ويقيمك على السنة الماضية كاملة. What happens? What is the problem here? The problem happens and occurs when the manager only focuses on the last 3 months and ignores the previous 9 months. طيب يا أخي أنا من جانيوري إلى سبتمبر إلى أغسطس وأنا كنت أكرف، وكنت أحسن واحد وأجي أول واحد وأطلع آخر واحد ونتائج جدا ممتازة. حصل لي آخر 3 شهور في السنة أنه أنا مستواي قل شوية. لما جاء المانجر يقيمني ركز فقط على ال3 شهور الأخيرة هذه اللي أنا ما كنت فيها ممتاز 100%، وتناسى كل ال9 شهور الأولى اللي أنا كرفت فيها كرف شديد جدا. So that is availability bias, is when you only focus on the most recent information. And then representation bias is drawing analogies and seeing identical situations when none exist. When you are trying to say that, situation A is very similar or actually identical to situation B, so what we did in situation A is also going to be successful in situation B. The problem is that situations A and B are totally different. They're not identical, they're not even similar. So you are basically making connections that are not there. أجي أقول لك نفس اللي صار في شركة أرامكو صار عندنا في الشركة، وبالتالي الحل اللي سوته شركة أرامكو راح ينجح معانا. يختلف الوضعين تماما. And you are involved in making a comparison that is totally not there. And finally, randomness bias is when you create unfounded meaning out of random events. أحداث عشوائية تحصل عندك في الشركة وانت تحاول تربطها ببعض، احداث عشوائية يعني ما لها علاقة ببعض نهائيا، خلل في المصنع زائد مش حريق في احد الفروع زائد استقالة احد الموظفين. هذا انت في راسك هذا مربوط بهذا مربوط بهذا، فكلها لها علاقة ببعض. فبالتالي لما انا ازود رواتب الموظفين كل هذه الامور راح تنحل. بناء على ايش؟ These are random events. They are totally not related. So when you try to connect them together and say that because these events are connected and related, of course the problem is the same, the source of the problem is the same, and now the solution is going to be only one for all of them. هنا تجي المشكلة. This is a problem, this is a mistake, this is a bias, this is an error. I cannot stress this enough. These are all problems that you must avoid in decision making. So randomness bias is when you try to connect events that are not connected. And then we have sunk costs errors. This is basically forgetting that whatever you do right now is only going to improve the future. It's not going to change the past. جاك تقرير ربع السنة الأولى. قلنا إيش هو ربع السنة? What is a quarter? A quarter is the 3 months of a year. So ربع السنة الأولى جاك تقرير والله المبيعات الشركة انخفضت. فالآن أي قرار تتخذه وأي خطوة تتخذها في سبيل تصحيح هذا الوضع ما راح يعدل مبيعات اللي راحت، راح فقط يحسن المبيعات اللي جاية. So whatever you do is only going to improve the future. It's not going to change the past. It's not going to change the history. So sometimes managers forget about this. Decision makers forget about this. And they are still stuck in, why haven't things improved in the last quarter? Well, there was a problem. We fixed it. But now we cannot change history. It will only change whatever that is going to come in the future. Then you have self-serving bias, which is taking quick credit for success and blaming outside factors for failures. لما يصير شيء كويس، لما القرار اللي تتخذه يكون ممتاز ويكون نتائجه إيجابية، تنسب النجاح لنفسك. You take credit for yourself. أنا كنت السبب، أنا اللي كنت كويس، قراري أنا هو اللي خلى السيتويشن هذا يكون positive. لكن لما يصير العكس، لا مش أنا، الموظفين الثانيين هم اللي الله يهديهم مش كويسين، الوضع الاقتصادي في البلد شوية تعبان عشان كذا المبيعات ما قدرنا نحسنها، مش عارف إيش. So when a good thing happens, you take credit for yourself. When a bad thing happens, you blame others or you blame outside factors. You never, take responsibility for any failure. وأخيرا, Hindsight Bias, that is mistakenly believing that an event could have been predicted once the actual outcome is known. So after the fact. This is a nice expression in the English language, after the fact. You should probably Google it and get more examples of it. One good example that I could think of was the global financial crisis in 2008. الأزمة الاقتصادية العالمية اللي حصلت في الماضي، كلهم كانوا يقولوا فقط لو كنا نعرف إنه راح يصير كذا كان عرفنا إن إحنا نتفادى هذه الأزمة وما كانت راح تصير أي شيء. وهذا كلام كله غير صحيح, because you could have never avoided such a big problem. حتى لو أنت عارف إن هذه راح تسبب في إفلاس شركات وفي إفلاس حكومات حتى ودول, مش بس شركات, لأنه خلاص الوضع كان جدا سيء وغير قابل للتعديل. This is called hindsight bias, when you mistakenly believe that I could have avoided the situation, I could have avoided the problem only if I had known the actual outcome. This is totally wrong. It is after the fact. خلاص, things have happened and it is inevitable that the outcome is going to be this or that. You cannot do anything about it. So this figure now basically gives you a summary of all of these biases, all of those errors that we just talked about. So why are we learning about errors? Why are we learning about mistakes? Once you know the mistakes, you can avoid them. Once you know that this is a problem that sometimes managers fall, victims of, now you can come up with a way, with a procedure, with a procedure in order to avoid making this problem, to avoid making that mistake. And this is an overview or a summary of the entire chapter, basically. So what is the decision-making process, the different steps, the types of problems in decision-making, the different decision-making approaches, styles, conditions, and so on. إذن هذا الرسم basically يلخص لك الشابتر كامل. So now we have spent some time talking about problems. Now let's talk about, actual tips, things that you should do. اللي اتكلمنا عنها قبل شوية, these are things that you should avoid. So what should you do as a manager? What should you do as a decision maker? You should understand cultural differences. Number one, what happens in a certain organization is not necessarily 100% applicable in other organizations or situations. فقط لأنه سابق نجحت في تطبيق شيء معين ما يعني إنه أنت شركتك اللي مشابهة جدا لسابق راح تنجح في تطبيقه كذلك. Why? ثقافة الشركة، ثقافة الناس اللي موجودة فيها، ثقافة البلد، ثقافة المجتمع, and so on. So when we say culture, we don't only refer to the culture of the country or the culture of the society or the culture of the city. We refer even to the culture of the organization. Not only the organization, but the culture of a certain branch. بعض البنوك مع انها نفس الشيء، نفس المنظمة، هو نفسه بنك الرياض، لكن فرع الجبيل غير فرع بريدة غير فرع خميس مشيط. Okay? Why? The culture of the people, the different norms and cultural differences between people in different situations or in different locations. Okay, so whenever you make a decision, always think of cultural differences. Then you have to create standards for good decision making. مو قلنا في شيء اسمه procedure؟ الشركات الآن تبدأ تشتغل على إنها تطور طريقة لحل المشكلات. صار متعارف عليه في مجال الإدارة something called the 3M way of decision making. شركة 3M الأمريكية المشهورة العالمية طورت طريقة في حل المشكلات، صار الناس يسموها طريقة 3M في حل المشكلات واتخاذ القرارات. Okay, so in your organization or for yourself as a manager, try to come up with a good way, with good standards of making decisions. Then know when it's time to call it quits. أحيانا لازم تعترف إنه هذه المشكلة أو هذا الوضع أكبر منك، فإما أنت تحتاج أشخاص آخرين وخبراء زيادة يدعمونك، أو أنت تعترف إنه أنا ما أستطيع حل هذه المشكلة، أعطوها لشخص آخر. Okay, then use effective decision-making process. Always, try to be up to date. اقرأ، ابحث، شوف المجلات العلمية إيش كتبت، شوف الشركات الأخرى إيش كتبت. Try to always incorporate those effective decision-making processes in your approach. And then finally, build an organization that can spot the unexpected and quickly adapt to the changed environment. لما أنت تعرف هذه المشكلات اللي تكلمنا عنها, all these biases, all these errors, all these mistakes, now you can avoid it. So try to design your organization and build a culture, create those procedures and policies that help you spot these problems, and also adapt to any situation that could happen.
After discussing some of the guidelines for making better decisions, so let's take some time to discuss some of the characteristics of an effective decision-making process. So if you want your process to be effective when it comes to making decisions, what are some of the things that you can follow? Some of the things, the tips and strategies that you can keep reminding yourself of when you are in the process of making a decision. Well, at the top of the list is focusing on what's important. Try to keep reminding yourself all the time, are we really focusing on what matters? Is this, something of the greatest priority here or not? So try to keep yourself focused on what really matters. And then, is my process, is the steps that I'm following, are they logical and consistent? Do they make sense? Am I using the same kind of measurement throughout my process, or am I using different standards for different processes? So you need to be consistent. You shouldn't change things all of a sudden and all the time. And then the process that you're following should also acknowledge subjective and analytical skills. So basically you have to use a blend, you have to use a mix of both analytical thinking and also intuitive thinking. So you use numbers and predictions and mathematical equations, for example, to come up with the different scenarios, the possibilities, and you also use your gut, you use your intuition to ensure that you are not being biased. And also the process that you are following should require only as much information as needed to resolve a particular dilemma. Meaning, do not overwhelm yourself with information. Information can be plenty and you can have access to a lot of sources of information, but you can fall into the trap of having a lot of information and not being able to use them in an effective way. So use as much information as you need, don't go beyond that. And also try to ensure that you are encouraging the gathering of relevant information. So only the information that has some use for you. You, as mentioned, you can have access to a lot of types of information, to big data, to high volume information. So make sure that you are only focused on collecting, on gathering information that is relevant to your topic. And finally, is the process that you're following straightforward? Is it something that is clear, reliable, easy to use, and flexible? Meaning you don't want, again, to be falling into the trap of wasting a lot of time, energy, and money into adopting a process that ends up not achieving your goals and objectives. So make sure that the process you're following is clear, is something that is easy to use, and also flexible. So in case you feel that the process that I'm following is not really achieving the goals that I want, is not really serving my objective, then it should be flexible enough so that you are able to change it. And since we talked a little and touched a little on the subject of big data and having a lot of information, you have to realize that you can have access to a lot of information, to a vast, huge amount of quantifiable data, and you can analyze this data by using highly sophisticated data processing methods. But again, even though this can be a very powerful tool when it comes to decision making, you can waste a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of money when you are just analyzing data for the sake of analysis. You only should be collecting information and data that is relevant to your decision-making process. This is why you need to keep reminding yourself, and you need to check yourself throughout the process. Is this information, is it something that is actually going to help me or not? What am I going to benefit if I use this type of data in my research? How is this data going to help me make a better and a more effective decision? So big data, a lot of information, a lot of quantities, plenty of sources available out there. But you keep, even though they can be really, really helpful, but you need to keep checking yourself, and you need to ensure whether or not you're just wasting your time or you are actually getting some benefit and value out of this data.
Okay, the last concept that we will introduce in this chapter is design thinking. This is a new revolutionary way of approaching decision making. It basically goes back to the basics. It goes back to the beginning. How we even think about problems. من step number 1 اللي أخذناها في بداية الشابتر. This design thinking is a new way, modern way of how managers and executives, كبار التنفيذيين في الشركات, executives, how they are trained when it comes to approaching decision making. So you basically approach management problems like a designer would approach a designing problem. كيف المهندسين المعماريين وكيف المهندسين السيارات كيف مهندسين المصانع لما يكون في خلل في تصميم المصنع كيف يحلون المشكلة هذه؟ يرجعون للمخططات ويحسبون كل شيء ويحاولون يتأكدون 100% أنه كل الخيارات محسوبة ومدروسة. This is exactly how design thinking works for management as well. You are basically an engineer trying to engineer a new situation. تسمعون مثلا يقول لك هذا الشخص هو مهندس الرؤية، هذا الشخص هو مهندس التغيير في الشركة. من فين جاءت كلمة؟ هو مش مهندس ميكانيكي ولا مهندس كيميائي ولا مهندس مدني ولا غيره، هو شخص يكون تخصصه بزنس. لكن ليش سموه مهندس؟ لأنه يتصرف ويفكر مثل المهندسين. كيف يعني يفكر مثل المهندسين؟ في مبادئ، في principles، في mathematical analysis that goes into making decisions and approaching problems. Companies and organizations spend a lot of money in order to train their managers, their CEOs, their vice presidents, their executives on design thinking, because it has been, this is a trend in the field of management, and it has been very popular in very large organizations. So design thinking, this is all you need to know about design thinking for now, but it is always good to know more about it. So search it. You will find plenty of websites that offer free online courses about design thinking. Who knows, this could be a question in a job interview. تتفاجأ في واحدة من مقابلات العمل عشان الكوب ولا عشان تتوظف بعد التخرج إن شاء الله، يقول لك هل سمعت بشيء اسمه design thinking? Okay, so at least now you can say yes. So thank you so much. This concludes our chapter, and I'll see you inshallah on chapter number 3.